Hi, my name is Patience, and on Wednesdays I do deep dives into topics I find interesting, and today I want to talk about pretty privilege. Now, some of you might have done a massive eye roll because at this point some people are sick and tired about hearing about pretty privilege, and there's also a bit of a conflict on whether or not it even exists. So today I want to kind of explore the topic of pretty privilege to see the people who argue that it does exist and those that argue that it doesn't exist, so we can see just how legitimate the claims about pretty privilege actually are. So let's first get into why people think that pretty privilege even exists. So Tiffany Markman wrote an article called The Ugly Truth About Pretty Privilege. Within the article, she said that we derive a pleasure from looking at attractive people, and we also make judgments about their success. We make judgments about their levels of intelligence, their health. Within the article, she also cites Rees, who argues that pretty privilege derives from biology and evolution. When we see attractive people, the reason why we are drawn to them is because they offer something to our gene pool, because of the fact that attractiveness tends to be associated with things like health and fertility. In 2006, the Harvard University did a study assessing the effects of attractiveness within the workplace, and they found three main things. So the first was that attractive people were able to earn more money because they were confident in terms of negotiating their salary. The second was that physically attractive people, due to their confidence, were often assumed to be more competent and more able by their employers. And then the third, they found that due to the confidence of the attractive workers, they had better social skills with the rest of their colleagues. Now, to be honest with you, I think that the Harvard study offers a lot of hope, because the key theme there was confidence. Not attractiveness, but more so confidence. Confidence was actually the causation, but there was a correlation between confidence and attractiveness. So although it looks as though attractiveness was what actually got them all of these things, it was actually more so confidence. And I can acknowledge that people who are attractive tend to have more confidence than people who are not conventionally attractive, because if you are attractive, then you're more used to having positive reinforcement from people around you. The good thing about confidence is that it's a skill. It's not something that anyone is born with. It's a skill that you can learn, you can acquire. So technically speaking, we could all technically benefit from these things that these attractive workers benefited from if we can improve and practice our confidence. Kendall O'Brien also wrote an article called Pretty Privilege is Real. Within the article, she discussed the fact that people who are more attractive tend to have better reproductive success, also tend to be healthier, and also tend to do better within their careers. Now, I feel like the Harvard study gave us a clear insight into why attractive people tend to do better within their careers, so I'm not really going to focus on that again with this one, but I do want to focus on why she found that people who are attractive tend to have a higher reproductive success, as well as a higher chance of being healthier. So when it came to reproductive success, I had to figure out first of all what that actually meant, like what she meant by that. And so from what I found, reproductive success refers to the ability for someone to spread their genes onto the future generation. So essentially your ability to have children. So at first I thought she was referring to fertility, like are attractive people more fertile than non-attractive people? So I had to research that to see if that was the case, but there's no evidence at all that supports the idea that attractive people are more fertile than non-attractive people. What she's referring to when she says reproductive success is simply the ability for you to find a partner to be able to have children with. When it comes to this, I don't really think this needs very much of an explanation. I think for most people it's kind of common sense that the more attractive you are, the more options you have in the dating pool. As a result of that, you have a higher chance of finding a partner to have kids with. So it makes sense that attractive people would have a higher chance of reproductive success. When it comes to her findings on attractive people being healthier, it reminded me of this podcast actually where there was a plastic surgeon. What he found was his clients, after they had received cosmetic surgery or cosmetic procedures, because they had a higher self-esteem, because they were happier with their new appearance and they were happier with their new look, that boost in self-esteem started to transcend into other areas of their life. They started to develop skincare routines, they started eating healthier, they started working out and dressing better, etc. So it's very highly likely that what the plastic surgeon was seeing within his clients is also what these studies were observing when they found that attractive people are more healthier. It's not necessarily because attractive people are biologically predisposed to being healthier than people who are not conventionally attractive, but it seems to be the case that the higher someone's self-esteem is, the more likely they are to take care of themselves. Because often the way we present ourselves is a massive reflection of how we feel about ourselves. If you're someone who's not conventionally attractive and you don't don't really feel too good about yourself, you're quite insecure, you're more prone to self-neglect. You're less likely to make an effort in your appearance. You're less likely to make an effort with things like what you eat, etc. Because maybe you don't see the point in it, or you feel as though you don't deserve it. So likelihood is, again, similar to the Harvard study that found that the actual causation was confidence, but there was a correlation with attractiveness. It seems here that the actual causation is more likely self-esteem, but there is, again, a correlation between self-esteem and attractiveness. O'Brien also discusses the halo effect, which is the idea that you assume a positive attribute because of another positive attribute. For example, assuming that someone is more trustworthy because they're attractive. Personally, I blame this on Disney because I feel like Disney really instilled into a lot of our brains that good people are attractive and bad people are ugly. O'Brien says that the halo effect has a really big impact in terms of how we perceive other people, for example, within the courtroom and criminals. And there is some weight to this because when you think about serial killers, for example, like the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, the Ted Bundys, there were a lot of women in particular who thought that these men were innocent and that they did not commit these crimes because they found them attractive and they were a lot more sympathetic towards them. So there definitely is some truth to this. We're a lot more likely to not believe that someone committed a horrific crime if they're attractive as opposed to if they're not attractive. And again, I think it just goes down to the fact that we have been kind of conditioned to think that bad people look a certain way and good people look a certain way. But really and truly, attractive people break the most hearts. Just saying. Another example I guess you could use to support the idea of pretty privilege would be the prison bae. I don't know if anyone remembers that viral mugshot that went around of that man. I don't really remember what his name was, but there was a mugshot of him that went viral because of the fact that people thought that he was really attractive. Interestingly enough, when he came out of prison, he was actually offered a lot of modeling jobs because of the fact that his mugshot went viral. And some could easily argue that that is an example of, you know, the benefits of being attractive, is because for most people, when they come out of prison, they struggle to find work and they struggle to, you know, get employment. They rarely come out and get offered a modeling contract. O'Brien also believes that we are being spoon-fed to believe that people's looks and attractiveness is the most important thing about them. As she states, and I quote, "When they are given handouts for their exterior, they are taught that the bare minimum is okay, but looks fade and the attractive people will end up mourning their past when they lose their privileges because they won't have developed any other qualities aside from their attractiveness." That was pretty harsh. But as harsh as what she said is, it's also kind of true. Paulina Poroskova has been very candid and open about the struggles that she's faced as she's gotten older. There was a time when she used to walk into a room and all the heads would turn, but now unfortunately she doesn't have the same effect because the new models are the ones who are now taking all of the attention. And this, my friends, is why I say I think you should absolutely enjoy your beauty and enjoy your youthful years, because why the hell shouldn't you? However, I also think it's important for you to be more than just your appearance, because your looks will fade, but all of your other qualities and attributes will remain. So enjoy your beauty, but don't make it the center of your universe and don't make it your entire personality. Now, there are, of course, some criticisms of pretty privilege. Some people have actually found that being attractive has actually worsened their self-esteem. You might personally value yourself on your intelligence. You might value yourself on your skill or your talent, etc. But if all people can focus on is your attractiveness, then that can also be quite a hit to your self-esteem. A lot of people prefer to pride themselves on things that they've actually worked hard for and things that they've actually done. Some attractive people feel as though their friendships are often very disingenuous. Some people often befriend them simply because they want the status of being friends with them or being close to them, but really they are constantly looking and waiting for their downfall. Attractive women have complained that this is something that they find often happens with their relationships with other women because they want to outshine them. So sometimes this can make them quite guarded and not as trusting of people because they don't know if people are being friends with them for the right reasons, because they generally have an interest in them, or if they want the status of being around them, or if it's really because they're just trying to stab them in the back at some point later down the line. Also, the high expectations that we place on attractive people can also be a downside. So this would be the downsides of the halo effect. You know how O'Brien stated that because of the halo effect, we assume that attractive people have other positive attributes. That assumption can actually be a bad thing too, because if you assume that because someone's attractive that they're all of these other positive things, you naturally have a higher expectation of what you expect from them. And so when they don't meet your expectations, you're more likely to be more harsh and more critical of them than you would with someone who you didn't have those expectations for. One good example that I've personally observed is when it comes to quietness. If an attractive person is very quiet, people assume that it's because they're stuck up and withdrawn and that they just don't want to talk to people. People rarely assume it's because of shyness, right? But if someone who is not conventionally attractive is quiet, people assume that it's just because they're shy. And this definitely would be one of the downsides of the halo effect, because we have high expectations of attractive people. If you see an attractive person, you assume that they're confident, right? So if they're not talking to people and they're being quite withdrawn and reserved, you assume that it's coming from a place of arrogance. Adding on to the expectations, there are some attractive people who feel as though they have to maintain their attractiveness at all cost, because that's what people value them for the most. So therefore they feel as though that's what they have to maintain. It's kind of like a reinforcement thing. But the problem with this is that they start to feel quite crappy within their self-esteem, because they start to again feel as though that's all they're valued for and nothing else. Another issue that attractive people have kind of run into is that they find that people are less empathetic towards them. People just don't really feel bad for attractive people. It's kind of like rich people. People don't feel bad for rich people either. People just don't really take their problems seriously because they're attractive. So they assume that regardless of whatever problem the attractive person is going through, their life is still going to be worse than them because at least they have pretty privilege or whatever. So people are very dismissive towards them. So in conclusion, does pretty privilege exist? Hello friends, how are you? It is I, Editing Patience here. So I watched my conclusion and there's some things that I want to change slightly and tweak. So rather than do a long voiceover correcting some of the stuff that I said, I thought it would just be easier to just re-record the conclusion. So in conclusion, does pretty privilege exist? Yes, I do think that pretty privilege does exist, because if it didn't, then we wouldn't have beautiful people making a lot of money just from posting selfies on Instagram. That being said, I do think that pretty privilege is overrated as well in a way. Some things that people attribute to attractiveness are actually due to other things such as confidence or self-esteem, etc. So yes, I do think pretty privilege is a real thing. I think that if you are an attractive person, you 100% are going to have an advantage in certain spaces in life. And I also don't think that that's a bad thing. Here's the thing, right? What I find really interesting about pretty privilege is that it's a double standard, because attractiveness is a gift, right? No one earns attractiveness. You just kind of, well, unless you get plastic surgery or something like that. But typically speaking, we are born with the looks that we have, and it's genetics. So you won the genetic lottery, essentially, if you're attractive. And that's fair enough, right? But we criticize people for monetizing that or building careers from it. And the fact that they have all these opportunities and stuff in aesthetic-based industries, we criticize them for the fact that that's the case. But I find it odd because we don't do that with anything else. Like, for example, singers. People like Adele, Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, right? They were born with the ability to sing. You know, we all know someone who loves to sing but cannot sing to save their lives, right? I mean, look at X Factor, the X Factor audition series. Those poor people go on there genuinely thinking that they could become a musician and they're passionate about it, but they cannot sing to save their lives. But yet we don't champion those people and say it's not fair that they don't get to have successful world careers just because they can't sing. Why does Adele get to be able to do that? All she has is vocal privilege. Like, no one does that. No one says that. And it's the same thing with athletes. You could be a 5-foot guy who's willing to work really hard, train all day, every day, you know, because you want to be a basketball player. But unfortunately, if you're a 5-foot man, you are not making it to the NBA. But that's completely outside of your control. You don't get to control your height. But we don't say things like, oh, LeBron James just has height privilege. As much as we like to say it's just training, of course, that's a big part of it, but you need the genetics to be able to build on. And it's kind of similar with modeling and all of these other aesthetic-based industries. Yes, you're attractive, but there's also other things you have to do in order to meet the standard that these industries want, whether that's maintaining a very strict diet and a very, you know, religious workout routine and skincare routines, etc.,
or also having a talent on top of your attractiveness in order for you to get very far. If you are attractive, you are going to have an advantage, undeniable. But there's also other things typically that you also need in order to get very far. You need to have a good work ethic, you need to be confident, you need to be ambitious and willing to go after those things. Now, granted, someone who's less attractive would not be able to achieve what you have, even if they had all those other qualities, such as being ambitious, hardworking, etc. But again, in the same way that someone who can't sing shouldn't get to be a singer, someone who's not attractive shouldn't get to succeed in an aesthetic-based industry. Just like someone who's not very smart shouldn't get to excel in an intelligence-based industry. I guess when it comes down to it, ultimately, life is just unfair. And sometimes you're going to have advantages and you're going to have disadvantages. And that's just kind of the way it is. All you can do is capitalize on the things that you do have. For example, it's not fair that you live in a Western country. There are some people in developing countries who have the work ethic, have the drive, but they will never be able to have the same resources and opportunities that you have purely because of where they were born. Is that fair? No, it's not. But that's just kind of how life is. And just like some people are going to be more attractive than you, some people are going to be more intelligent than you. And because of that, they're going to benefit from those advantages and be able to do things that you can't do. But I don't think that any of this is a bad thing. I think that people who are more intelligent than me should be able to excel more than me in intelligence-based things. I think that people who are more attractive than me should get to excel further than me in attraction-based things. I think people should be able to get the benefits of things that they are better at than other people. But then again, I don't believe in equity. I don't think that everybody is entitled to the same outcomes. So maybe that's the reason why my perspective is this way. I don't know. When it comes to the pretty privileged conversation, I think a lot of it comes from envy, because like I said, no one's ever complaining about the fact that only good singers could get to sing and have singing careers, and no one's complaining about the fact that only genetically gifted people get to be athletes. But I think with the pretty privileged one, I think the reason why it's such a big conversation is because it makes a lot of people feel crappy about themselves. Have you also noticed that the vast majority of people who talk about pretty privilege or who complain about it are women? Personally, I don't think that this is a coincidence. It makes perfect sense. When you consider the fact that women place a higher importance and value on their appearance, women are a lot more likely to be self-conscious about their appearance, etc. It makes sense as to why they would feel some type of way about women who are more attractive than them, because all it does is highlight their own insecurities and highlight how they don't look like that person. So it completely makes sense to me as to why this is predominantly a female issue. The idea that there are people who are more attractive than us and who get to do all these really cool things that we'd love to do, but we don't meet the standard. But I don't know. I feel like that's just a very unproductive way to view life. I think that all of us are going to have advantages and disadvantages. Just like I said, it's your advantage is that you live in a country where you get to be whatever you want to be. You know, the idea that in the West you can have a whole career off of being a writer or have a career off of selling slime online, it's just for some countries that's just unrealistic and absolutely absurd. But the reality is you get the ability to do that. So is that fair? Absolutely not. But it's just kind of how life is. And I think in the same way that there are privileges that you have that many parts of the world will never be able to experience, I think you also have to accept that there are some privileges and advantages that other people will have that you'll never get to experience. But rather than dwelling on the things that you don't have or the disadvantages that you have, I think it's much more sensical to acknowledge what you do have and just capitalize on those and make the most out of those, because comparison is and always will be the thief of joy. And that is my new conclusion. Does pretty privilege exist? Yes. Is it a bad thing? No. But those are just my thoughts. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Do you think pretty privilege is real? If you do, tell me why. Or have you even maybe experienced pretty privilege? And if you have, I'd love to know what that experience was like. Well, if you made it this far into the video, then you may as well like and subscribe. I am also on other socials as well, and I do also make music. Links to my socials and my music will be in my description box. Thank you very much for giving me your time today, and I will see you in my next video.